Hi, I'm Dr. Meade from Developmental FX, and this is Rachel Momquist. We are doing a recording of our DFX Dialogues from the book Freeing Your Child from Anxiety, and wanted to just share the presentation with you all in case you missed the live Zoom meeting that we had. So Rachel and I are going to be talking about the book Freeing Your Child from Anxiety, written by Dr. Tamar Chansky.
We picked this book because, anxiety is a part of our world these days, especially right now. And we felt like it was a really good, match to the world, but also kind of how we treat and look at anxiety here at Developmental FX. We really want to emphasize the importance of acknowledging anxiety and, providing treatment and prevention for it.
And I think at DFX, one of the things that we really value and find important is having the connection between the body and the mind. And this book does a really great job of bringing those things together and working in tandem to help kids overcome their anxiety.
So this book is all about how to get you to be a worry-wise parent and raise a worry-wise kid. What it really means is, worry is part of life. It's part of your growth. It's part of change. And worry won't go away and it won't change, but we can change our kids to kind of feel prepared to tackle that worry. So this book is all about the skills to take charge of worry.
Throughout the book, she does talk about some really specific worry lessons. So if this is something that you're interested in, definitely buy the book, look through and get the specifics for the lessons. But some of the take home with these lessons is that it's not the situation, it's just your worry brain telling you. She goes through some also strategies, so side-by-side comparison of really looking at fears versus facts. We'll talk more about the fear-anxiety combination coming up in just a second. And then moving into this behavioral side of exposing yourself to this feared situation, this anxiety stimulus. Anxiety is always telling you to avoid, and so we want to make sure is that we cut that avoidance out and we make sure we are doing something to face that fear.
So in the book, she kind of differentiates between fear and anxiety. Fear being, a natural and necessary part of life, an essential safeguard for survival. It is an adaptive human reflex, and it's actually developmental and seen in developmental stages, and in contrast.
So that anxiety is this unnecessary and disruptive feature of this fear. It's telling you that there's an emergency even when there isn't. And anxiety then moves into this behavioral aspect where it's hindering and restricting the child from interacting with the world around them. So that's an avoidance piece coming in of they're not approaching those things that they're fearing, and so they're keeping back, and it's changing the way they approach their life.
So the backstory of this fear and anxiety is this body's protection system, which a lot of you have maybe heard of, this early warning system that saves us from danger and helps us survive. It consists of that sympathetic nervous system, which is that fight-flight response, and that parasympathetic nervous system, which is that rest and restore. The key to this is that we were born with these mechanisms, and they were built for a time when physical danger was kind of part of our daily life. So we have all this stuff, and we're operating with this old equipment, but we don't necessarily have that physical life and danger around us these days. Also part of this protection system, Dr. Chansky really highlights the amygdala, which is kind of your brain security system. And when you sense danger or a threat, your amygdala kind of activates and your protection responses kind of take over. So she'll call this part of the brain the worry brain, the protector brain, kind of that immediate emergency mode, that like, I can't think, I'm on defense brain. And then in contrast, she talks about the amygdala friendly state, which is kind of that smart brain, that thinking brain, that calm, cool, collected, let's take a closer look and evaluate it brain. And I think the thing here is that these anxious children physiologically are living on a higher alert. They're over-oriented to see danger when it's not there. And their alarm system is mobilized and turned on without that immediate threat. So they're only following the instructions that the brain is giving them, which is proceed with caution, handle with care, warning, danger ahead. When you do have that amygdala activated state or that sympathetic nervous system activation, you often or usually feel it in your body as well. So here are some symptoms that probably you or a lot of our kids feel in the face of perceived threat. It can be racing heart, dizziness, sweating, temperature changes, stomach aches, trembling. I know for me, I feel that racing heart. I feel a flush in my skin sometimes. So it's definitely there.
And what's interesting about all these bodily sensations is that, with that alert system, these are things that are preparing your body to fight or flee. And so it's really great when there actually is a threat because it's going to help you survive. But the problem is when there is no threat, when it becomes this anxiety piece of it, your body is still activating as if there is a threat. And so you still feel this, and it can be really confusing and overwhelming for kids because it doesn't feel good.
Mm-hmm. And Dr. Chansky really highlights the importance of kind of describing to or explaining to a child what's happening in their body and their brain so that they kind of can attach meaning to their sensations and their feelings and not feel worried about that. And also have the confidence to know that, just because you're feeling this, you are safe, and, your body will cool down and reset, and we can help you do that.
So what we want to understand and then move towards is this, we have this anxiety equation, which is when we have this overestimation of a threat. Something's happening and our alarms are going off, our body's telling us this isn't safe, this isn't safe. And then we have this underestimation of this ability to cope. So something's happening, it's really scary, it's really big, and I don't know what to do with it. Now I'm really anxious. We want to move from that into the new equation of taking charge of the anxiety. So to do that, we're going to shrink the fear. We're going to fact check. We're going to use our smart brain. We're going to think about the situation. We're going to approach it. We're going to make sure that we stop that avoidance and we realize this is something I can do. And it'll be small steps. It works up to it. And when you combine those two, you get this mastery response of the child really feeling like, I got this. This is something that I can do. I don't have to feel anxious about it anymore. So Dr. Chansky, we wanted to touch base on the difference between transitory anxiety and problematic anxiety, because many of us feel these signs of transitory anxiety on a daily basis, or just kind of throughout our day. Right now we have it maybe more so because of what we're going through, but it's important to know when you have that crossover into the problematic anxiety. So really that crossover becomes when the child can't function, when it's preventing them from doing the things that they want to do, that they're supposed to do, when you can't reassure them and go through with it, when the child is so overwhelmed and inconsolable. Those are signs that you as a parent might need to take the next step to get some professional help. And so who is the anxious child? Dr. Chansky talks about 5 different types of anxious children, and this can help, just have a better understanding of, is what my child experiencing part of anxiety? We have the verbal anxious child who is very clear of expressing their worries. They talk openly about it. They might talk endlessly about these things that are making them anxious. So it's pretty easy to know when that's the one that you have. The undercover anxious is where they seem to have it together, and let's say at school, they're going through their day, things are good, but then they get home and there's big blow-ups, there's big meltdowns. They're trying to mask and hide those feelings, and then when they're in a comfortable situation, they're more likely to let those feelings out. The somatizer is the children who really get those body-based anxiety feelings, and so those are the kiddos who complain of their tummy hurting or having headaches. You may actually have vomiting before an anxiety-provoking event. They're really holding it so much more in their body. The angry, anxious child, that's the one really kind of insisting on they don't need help, and so they're going to blow up and show that anxiety through anger instead. And then we have the avoider, which is the one who's saying like, oh no, I'm fine. Like I don't like parties. I don't like them, so I'm not going to go. And they're just kind of pushing it all aside and not even realizing this is anxiety.
So Dr. Tamar has an amazing book and filled with so much information. And I think what we decided to kind of take a lot of the information from the previous chapters and synthesize them into her steps of chapter 8. So this is the master plan for taking charge of anxiety. There are 7 steps, and we're just going to go through each one of them. So step one is kind of empathizing with what your child is feeling. So always approaching your worrying child with empathy, meeting them where they're at, establishing a connection, and acknowledging kind of what's going on. And that can be through words, but that can be through gestures or body language. And then kind of listening to what they're saying and reflecting back to them. What she kind of says is convert permanent pronouncements into temporary frustration. So on the right there, you can see some examples, but kind of restating what they're telling you in a workable manner. So kind of taking what they're giving you and leading them in a different direction.
Step 2 is relabel the problem as the worry brain. This is a really, really important step. We need to have the child understand, where this information lies, what's happening to their body. It's all connected in the brain. And so we want to make sure that we teach the child about the brain. And in the book on page 74, she gives a really good example of some brain scripts of how you can explain this to the child. But this just gives them a nice base regarding the protector brain, the threat brain, what information is coming in and how you can kind of sort it to better understand, is this my smart brain or is this my protector brain taking over? And so once you build that foundation of having an understanding of what the brain is doing, then you can help the child really understand, like, we're not going to let the amygdala ruin your day. We're not going to let that side of your brain win. And it's a big shift because what happens is, your brain is used to whatever path you go to, those neurons in your brain are really strong. The mind gets used to whatever it's doing the most of. And so for the anxious child, that's the strongest network that you have. And so you need to start shifting it away from that. And so this is the first piece, is teaching them about the brain, relabeling the problem as the worry brain, and you're really pinning the problem on the problem. Not your child, it's not the situation, it's just the tricks that this worry is playing on you. So we need to kind of take a step away and realize we have to build a second, more realistic reaction and think twice about what's happening. And then within that, kind of helping the child understand this connection between how we think, how we feel, and what we do, and that we have power in manipulating those things, and we can take charge with our smart brain to change what our worry brain wants to tell us. She talks about one of the strategies is using this brain train, where you're kind of understanding, here we have the worry track, which, if we take the situation of a field trip, the worry is telling you, what if we get lost? What if there's an accident? What if someone throws up on the bus? When we start thinking those things, we're going to feel anxious. When we feel anxious, we don't want to do it, so I'm going to ask Mom if I can stay home. So we need to stop right there. We need to take another look and say, that's one track, but we have this other track here. We have the truth track. So let's think instead. Field trips are fun. We get to miss school. The teacher knows what to do. If you start thinking that, you're going to feel excited. You're not going to be nervous, and you're going to want to go. So we can help kids start to shift that thinking by giving them some different ways to think about it, and helping them with also saying things like, it sounds like worry's talking to you. Worry's up to its old tricks. Worry's the one coming in here. We don't have to think about it, so we can go on to the next. So step 3 is really getting into more the nitty-gritty of how to rethink all this information and shrink those worries. So we want to make sure we don't let worry have the last word. The first thought about the situation is not the only thought or the true thought. And so we can help children understand that. And question it. Does this make sense? Is this really the only way that it's going to happen? So in chapter 6, I think this was, or 5, chapter 5, this is chapter 5. Yeah. She outlines many, many lessons and many strategies. I just highlighted a couple on here that were kind of some takeaway ones. And so one lesson is to really understand this power of suggestion. Any one of us, once we start thinking about something scary, we're going to start to feel scared. If I start to say, oh my gosh, there's 1,000 bugs crawling all over you, you're going to start to feel itchy. Just the thought of that changes how you feel and what you might start doing. You're going to itch your skin. And so we can help kids understand, just because we think something doesn't mean it happens. And so let's shift that thought. The other thing that happens so quickly in anxiety is this all or none thinking. So possible doesn't mean likely. something's possible in a bad situation, but it doesn't mean it's going to happen. The chance of this happening is actually pretty low. And this ties into the third one on here of the once doesn't mean always, it means rare. So oftentimes an anxious child will have had a bad experience with something. So maybe they threw up on the bus on this field trip and it was really embarrassing and terrifying. And so now they're afraid to ride the bus and they think every time I ride the bus, I'm going to throw up and it's going to be the same thing again. Well, it just so happens this kid had a stomach virus and it happened, you know, it's a rare thing. How often do we actually throw up on the bus? Not very often. And so we can help kids kind of understand, you know, you've ridden the bus every day for 5 years, twice a day. And so that's, I don't know, thousands of times, and you did it once. So it's a rare thing and it's unlikely to happen again. So we can move into the strategies after you understand the lessons of, you know, how can you take these lessons and use them with your kiddo? So one of the strategies Dr. Chansey talks about is making this brain sorter so that you're able to say like, okay, this is a worry thought and this is a true thought. And then you can move your focus to the true thoughts. Doing a side-by-side comparison is when you take the worry and you turn it into a question. So it's kind of like, what if I get lost? Am I going to get lost? And then you can think of that plan of, well, no, I'm not going to get lost because there's a teacher there, there's parents there, I'll be just fine. She talks about the strategy of who's talking, where you bring in this aspect of play, you can make it playful, because if you can be playful and silly, that fear is not going to be as big. So using things like animals where you have one be the worry side of your brain and one be the smart side, and you have that conversation and you make the worry side have a funny voice, can, you know, bring that threat down from the child too and help them think more clearly with their smart brain.
Step 4 is get the body on board, turn off all the alarms. So this is really kind of focused on those body-based strategies to kind of shift from amygdala triggered state to amygdala friendly state. So she talks a lot about pausing and slowing down the moment. One of my favorite things she says is making an anxiety moment a two-person moment. So kind of utilizing that co-regulatory force. With younger kids, she talks about really just breathing with each other. Older kids, it could be more of a countdown. And then one of my other favorite things she says is your job is to try to tell the kid, your job is to try to slow things down when you are ready. So kind of taking the pressure off and letting them know, you know, your body will shift back and we're going to help your body calm down together. For longer term practicing on turning off the alarm, she talks about a worry temperature. So kind of taking a temperature, a scale of how worried you are, and so that the kid can understand that we can impact change on your feelings and your sensations and your symptoms of anxiety. The next thing she talks about is movement. Number one, how important it is to keep movement kind of in your daily life, to keep your baseline low, which we'll talk about in a minute. But also sometimes kids, younger kids particularly, really need movement before they can really pause and slow down. And then lastly, like I just mentioned, keeping that baseline low. One of the examples she gives is the anxiety bucket, which is kind of the idea that if you have a lot of stressors, they kind of pile up in this bucket. And when you're kind of on the defense and you have a lot going on, you feel more threatened by things. So one little thing that might have not bothered you before kind of overflows the bucket and you just all comes out. So the idea is to kind of do things throughout the week, throughout the day, to take out those stressors or keep your baseline low. And that can include, you know, breathing, movement. She talks a lot about progressive muscle relaxation, things like that.
Step 5 is approaching the worry on purpose and practice getting used to it. So this is the behavioral aspect, which is really, really important. Because what anxiety is always telling us is to avoid. You know, this is hard, this is uncomfortable, it's scary, it's not safe, so don't do it. And when you don't do it, that's just reinforcing that I can't, this isn't going to happen. And so the only way to kind of really move past it is to start with some of these exercises. And so we have to find this sweet spot so that our amygdala can really learn, like, oh, wait a minute, this was a false alarm, you're safe, you got this. And so we don't want something that's too easy because that will not evoke enough anxiety where it's a learning experience and the kids will be bored and just it won't be meaningful. And we don't want it too high because then we get into that freak out zone where they're just too on alert. And so they're not able to learn from it and they're unlikely to even try the exercise in the first place. So she talks about these lessons within this aspect as well. And this is really important because it's hard as a parent or somebody, you care about this child and you see how uncomfortable they are and how hard it is. And so we don't want them to feel uncomfortable. What we're asking them to do is to feel uncomfortable. It's kind of that purposeful feeling uncomfortable. And so you want to make sure, don't expect it to feel good at first, but trust that you'll adjust to this. The analogy of the swimming pool is a really great one where when you first get in the swimming pool, it's really cold and you might feel as if you can't swim. You give it a minute or two, it feels just fine and you're in the water for hours. And so talking to your child in that respect can help them understand, this isn't going to feel good, but you're going to adjust and it's going to be okay. We're doing this together. You want to make sure that you end on a note of success, not escape. If you cut the exposure too early, then you're really reinforcing that fear and you're saying that you just can't do it. So you want to make sure you're really reading where your child is at and helping them calm down using some of the tools, talking with them of let's slow it down together and let's see what we can do, and then make a new plan for the next steps from there. Also talking about exposures as a matter of fact, not a matter of fear, of just kind of going into it of we're doing this and we're going to get through it together and doing it.
Step 6 is refocus on what you want to do. So this is kind of after your child has kind of bossed around worry a little bit and they're kind of getting used to it, but they'll start to know that anxious feelings take a little time to pass. And so it's kind of good to just get busy with something else. Physical activity is best. And so this isn't really distracting. It's kind of empowering the kid. You can just pick up your mind and put it where you want it to be.
So then the final step is reinforcing your child's efforts at being courageous. So this is a lot of legitimate hard work for the child. And so you want to make sure that you reinforce and reward the child for this. And you can do this in a lot of different ways. Tangible reinforcers and rewards can really increase the willingness to start this. Again, remember, this is so hard for them. And so if you can tie it to something that they really like, giving them, extra TV time, or they get to pick the movie or something like that might help them over that hump of actually doing these things. Having for younger kids, especially a really tangible thing that shows that they can see, the progress that they made can help them along the journey. She talks about having 2 jars, one with worry on it, one with me on the other side, and putting a bunch of pennies or candies or just something in the worry jar. And then every time that child is making a step towards talking back to their anxiety or approaching their anxiety or using any of the strategies and tools talked about in the book, you move one over to the me side so you can see, the change that's happening. And I think with any, therapeutic technique or anything that we're really working hard at, it's important to know that there's going to be some bumps in the road. Every step forward, you might have a couple back. And so just kind of be prepared for having to readjust, having to re-examine, maybe having to go back to some earlier techniques that worked, and just having, an understanding that we can get through this and it's going to be okay.
And that's it. So we really enjoyed this book. I hope you guys did too. There's so much more information in it. That was just a very brief synthesis of all the information that we gathered from it. Dr. Tamara Chansky does have her own website, and she also has an organization called Worrywise Kids. She also has some other books, but I encourage you guys to check out her websites if you want more information.
And thank you for watching.